Simonians were actually using a Trinitarian concept of God. They claimed, according to Irenaeus, that Simon actually was Jesus in disguise. He was the son, in their language, in Judea to the Jews, but he came as the father deity to Samaria. Justin tells this really interesting story about Simonians worshiping a statue of Simon in Rome. Justin even claims that the Romans themselves set up this statue of Simon and put it on Tiber Island. And at the very point of this island was a statue. And Justin Martyr says that the statue was actually of Simon of Samaria, and that Simonians in Rome gathered around this statue and worshipped it. Justin says that the statue was for Simon, the god, so Simoni Deo, but actually the statue base, which we still have today, says that it's the god Simo Sancus, and that the Simonians in Rome adapted this figure because they identified Simon as the high god, a Zeus-like figure. And since Simo Sancus was similar to Zeus, incidentally, they also identified Helen with another goddess, Athena.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. Back joining me again for the trilogy now, M.Div Litwa. How are you doing today?
Great. It's nice and toasty here in Melbourne.
Nice and cold over here. Buffalo. So yeah, you got some presentation, and tell us about this presentation.
Yeah, so this is a series of presentations that I'm doing on my book, Found Christianities, which just came out from Bloomsbury T&T Clark. And this one is thankfully in a nice paperback version. So I think it's about $34 on Amazon.
Ooh,
and what I'm going to do is I've done some on some of the presentations on Myth Vision. I'm doing some here. Some of them will appear on my Patreon account exclusively for my patrons.
The link's in the description and it's in the comments, so you guys can go check that out. And you have different tiers, and so check out a tier that you think is suitable for you, and get aboard. Jump on this thing. I'm there too. So it's a party.
Yeah, so I'm making it available for anyone who wants to join the Patreon. You'll get the whole series, and basically I go through chapter by chapter with teasers of what you're going to find, and then when you get the book, you'll get all the facts and data and footnotes, and you can go to town and enjoy. So for this session in the series, I'm going to do chapter 3, which is on Simon of Samaria. He's sometimes called Simon Magus, but basically I don't use that term very intentionally because Magus is actually a term that heresiologists use to denigrate Simon. So, and then it's kind of been ossified. So I just refer to him as Simon of Samaria. All right, so Simon of Samaria, a historical portrait. This is hard because Simon is one of those characters who seems almost to be lost in the mist of history, that we don't have a lot of reliable information about him, but he's absolutely a central figure, okay? He's contemporary with Jesus. He might even be a little bit older than Jesus. He's contemporary with Paul. He's right there, smack dab in the middle of the first century, and he has this incredible influence in Samaria and Palestine and beyond. Let's look at the basic principle of history here, though, and this is really important if you're studying Simon, because there's lots and lots of ancient sources that you need to be familiar with, and some of them are not as good as others. So a basic principle to follow here is do not begin with polemical or apologetic writings when authentic writings are available. Basically, this should be a no-brainer, but oftentimes Simon is reconstructed from the perspective of his enemies, and his enemies are the ones who write most about him, namely Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, the Book of Acts, and novelistic portraits. If your viewers are familiar with the Pseudo-Clementine novels, these are 3rd and 4th century novels which supposedly give this grand narrative about Simon, but they're hundreds of years after him, and they're deliberately fiction. Where most people start mistakenly is with what else? The Bible, which is the book of Acts, and Simon appears in chapter 8. But the problem with Acts is equally a polemical portrait of Simon that is at root something you do not want to trust immediately. When you have an authentic source. And so this is really important, and not many people know this, but we do have an authentic source for understanding Simon that is a primary source written by his followers, and this source is called, in Greek, Hiapophasis Megali, the Great Declaration, and it's preserved in what's called the Great Declaration Commentary in a book called The Refutation of All Heresies. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. You can get your copy of The Refutation of All Heresies right online because I translated it.
Awesome.
Unfortunately, this book is a bit on the pricey side. What I'm going to do for my patrons who join me on Patreon is I'm going to make available this section of the book, which is less than 10%, and I'm going to upload it on my Patreon.
Wow, what a good deal.
So your viewers can read my Greek and English translation with notes of the Great Declaration Commentary.
So not only are they helping you out, they're helping you out with your Patreon, but they're also getting in return scholarly information on the Greco-Roman world, all heresies, all this good stuff. So they're getting something in return too. This is this win for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to make good scholarship available without the huge price tag. If you want to go get the book, the paperback, there's a used copy for $70. You might be able to find it cheaper. Ask your local library. You can try that route too. There's lots of good ways to get this material. But the easiest way is right through my Patreon account. So if you go to the Great Declaration Commentary and you delve into it, it's a little bit confusing. And so I'm going to break it down as best that I can in simple, basic terms. What this source says, and it's a source that seems to quote Simon himself. What this source says is that God is actually a primal and intellectual fire. He is fire, an unstoppable, immense, conscious fire. And that God gives birth to two powers. The first one is the great power, otherwise known as mind. And the second is thought, okay? And this is, in terms of what comes out of the name of Gnostic theology, this is the earliest case where we have these characters named. Okay, so thought, or other, sometimes known as enia or epenia, she is a very important principle in all early 2nd century Gnostic thought, but she appears here first. She is also called the 7th power, and she, as it turns out, is the archetype for human beings. They are made in her image. So that's the Simonian understanding of Genesis 1:26, where, if your viewers are familiar, God says to whoever he's dealing with, we don't actually know, let us make a human being in our image. The image is thought, 7th power. It's not God himself directly. And that's the basics of Simonian theology. And Simon himself appears as the speaker of this theology, but he doesn't appear as anything else. So he's discoursing on how he thinks the universe came into existence. And he does so through his own very unique interpretation of Genesis 1. Just delving in a little bit more detail here. So we think that, or I should say, I think, the Great Declaration Commentary is written on the basis of Simon's theology, and it's written sometime prior to 135 CE. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I think this. One of the reasons is the commentary quotes a Soranus of Ephesus, who's a physician whose writings we have, and so that we know when Soranus lived, we know when he wrote, and if the Declaration Commentary quotes Soranus, we can get a general idea of when the Declaration Commentary was written. I also think that the Book of Acts partly depends on the Great Declaration Commentary, and the Book of Acts, some people put it very early. I put it around 140 or 150. Wow. So it has to be prior to Acts. Justin Martyr encounters Simonians in Rome about 150, and he accuses Simon, the supposed founder, of deifying himself. That's the first time we get this charge. Now, interestingly, Justin tells this really interesting story about Simonians worshiping a statue of Simon in Rome. Justin even claims that the Romans themselves set up this statue of Simon and put it on Tiber Island. And if any of your viewers have been to Rome, you can still go to Tiber Island. It's shaped like a gigantic triangular ship. And at the very point of this island was a statue. And Justin Martyr says that the statue was actually of Simon of Samaria, and that the Simonians in Rome gathered around this statue and worshipped it. Interesting fact, in the Middle Ages, we found the base of this statue, and it ends up that Justin was either confused or something really weird was going on, because Justin says that the statue was for Simon, the god, so Simoni Deo, but actually the statue base, which we still have today, says that it's the god Simo Sancus. And this is a god of lightning and of sort of like a Zeus-like figure. It isn't Simon at all. What I think is it's possible that, and I go through this in the book, it's possible that Simonians in Rome still identified this statue with their founder, but that wasn't the original meaning of the statue. The Romans would have understood it in a different way. But there are many interpretations of what's going on here. But this is real stuff here. The author of Acts, when we get to Acts, he portrays Simon as a baptized Christian. And this is really important because some people, including many scholars, want to say that Simon wasn't a Christian at all. But the question then is why would the author of Acts portray him as a baptized Christian?
Right.
Well, because, I mean, why would he want to do that? That would have been embarrassing to him. But in actuality, that's probably the case, that Simon did self-identify as a Christian, and that this memory of him as a Christian couldn't be erased. Now, what the author of Acts does do is he can't deny that Simon was a Christian, but he tries to subordinate him to the apostle Peter, who shows up in Samaria and sort of puts the finishing touches on the mass conversion of the Samaritans.
Wow.
Probably not really a historical portrait, but an attempt for the author of Acts in the 2nd century to show that, yes, Simon was a Christian, but he was less than Peter, and he was also greedy.
I see.
And so there's a whole history of this. Since I'm not really prioritizing the author of Acts, I'm not going to get into that. That's discussed, in my opinion, far too often. The basic thing here is that you can trust some things in the portrait of Acts, but you can't trust everything. And the criteria that we use here is called the criteria of embarrassment. You have to ask yourself, in other words, what would the author of Acts be embarrassed about, but still tell you anyway? That's what's more likely to be true, okay, in a historical sense. So next point, we get to Irenaeus. Now, Irenaeus, I'm not sure if all your viewers know some of these figures. I should do a better job explaining them. But Irenaeus is this church leader in southern France, what modern-day Lyon. And he's the one who gives us this archetypal picture of Simon as the first Gnostic. So before Irenaeus, this wasn't the view of Simon. But after Irenaeus, Simon becomes the arch Gnostic. Okay, he is the father of all Gnostics everywhere. Everything stems from his thought, or the development of his thought. And the Simonian theology that Irenaeus encountered, and he's fairly late in the 2nd century, about 180, by his time, Simonians were actually using a Trinitarian concept of God. They claimed, according to Irenaeus, that Simon actually was Jesus in disguise. He was the son, in their language, in Judea to the Jews, but he came as the father deity to Samaria, that is to them. And Simon now exists as the spirit among the nations. Now, this is a fascinating development, and it seems to be a fairly late development, but here we have Simonians using obviously Christian language, Trinitarian language, but applying it all to Simon and showing that he is the revelation of the triform Godhead, basically.
He's the Son of God?
So he is Jesus. Okay, that's
mind-blowing.
That's the Simonian move. And then even later in the 2nd century, this is when we start getting novelistic portraits of Simon, who sails to Rome and does these magic tricks of raising people from the dead and killing them and making making dogs speak and so on and so forth. And stories arise of Simon battling Peter in Rome, and this is where you get that famous story of how Peter actually murders Simon, because Simon, his final miracle is that he's going to ascend to heaven. And as Simon is ascending before this huge crowd, Peter sends up this prayer to God, asking God to bring him down and shatter him. And lo and behold, as Simon is literally soaring through the sky, he falls at random and is crushed to death. Some say he dies immediately, being broken into 3 pieces. Some say that he was needed, he went to get recovery, but he died in the aftermath of this tremendous fall. Interestingly, here, Peter, from our perspective, doesn't end up looking too holy here. He basically sends up a curse prayer that ends up killing Simon. And that's where the story ends.
Wow.
The final bit of this is, and a very important part, is a woman by the name of Helen, and specifically Helen of Tyre. Now, according to Justin Martyr, who's writing about 150, he claims that Simon was in the city of Tyre, which is modern Lebanon, and he buys this woman out of sex slavery, and he identifies her. She becomes his partner in ministry, and he identifies her as the incarnation of the Father's primal thought. That is, she is wisdom incarnate.
Sophia.
She is Sophia. Yep.
Okay. Wow.
And
very Gnostic.
they travel around and they form their ministry. Okay. Now, this is a great conundrum, whether this for historians, and it's something that I think mythicists will enjoy as well, because the real question is, did this actually happen, right? Was there actually a woman that he traveled around with, or is this a later development of, we have an incarnation of Simon, or we have an incarnation of God in Simon, and therefore we need an incarnation of God's primal thought in the wisdom figure as Helen? Well, my bets are, whoever you think Helen was, whether she was historical or whether she's a mythicized figure that was then made historical, Helen was important for Simonians. Celsus, who's writing about 175, I think probably in Rome, tells us that Helen was a Christian teacher in her own right, and that her Simonian followers were even called Hellenians. So I think this is important because it shows us that we can't write off Helen. She's extremely important,
right?
At least to the later Simonians, and she is a divine figure incarnate. She is wisdom incarnate, and therefore a teacher. That's where I'll end.
That is all so fascinating. So I do have I have a couple notes that I didn't want to interrupt because it was so good. So I guess I'll start with the first one. You were talking about the fire being the sort of like, that's God, what he is. He's fire, a consuming fire. And I know that in Persian, Zoroastrian mythology, or whatever, religion, that's prominent there too, where they have the fire as being like, that is God, literally. I wonder if that sort of Persian dualism with the fire influences the Gnostics in the Christian era. You think that's a thing?
It could, but there's even something closer in Greco-Roman culture, and that's Heraclitus. Heraclitus was an ancient philosopher right around 500 BCE, and he said that God was fire. In fact, he believed that all of reality had fire at the center and core of it, and came from fire and would eventually go back into fire. And so the real background here, I mean, it could be, there could be a few Persian elements, but I think there's something much closer here that Simonian theology can lean on.
No, that's a great answer, because Heraclitus, if I'm not mistaken, he was one of the earliest writers to talk about gnosis, if I'm not mistaken, or in the Demiurge, one of the two.
Not the Demiurge, but he definitely was a philosopher who really criticized people for not knowing. Homer and Herodotus and Pythagoras, he really had some nasty things to say about them.
That's fascinating. It's good stuff, because so that's cool. Now the big one, this is the big one, Simon being worshipped. So when was this statue put up? Who are these people? Who's funding this? What is going on here? How do we know about this? And what, like, I want to dig into that just a little bit for like the last 2 minutes last couple minutes while we're doing this. When was this?
Sure. So I'll tell you Justin's side of the story. So Justin says, this is Justin Martyr, again, writing in Rome about 150. Justin says that Simon came to Rome in the reign of Claudius. That's around the 40s CE. So the Emperor Claudius reigns from 41 to 54. And so Simon goes to Rome during his period, and that he performs such amazing miracles that the Roman Senate makes a decree and honors him with a statue, as if he's a hero. Now, that's Justin's side of the story. What we think is actually going on is Sancus is a very ancient Italic deity, again, of lightning and of oaths. And this statue was probably put up hundreds of years before Claudius. And that what probably happened is the inscription was worn away, and that Simonians identified this figure, Simo, or Simon, as Simon, because our long I was for them an E sound. Okay, so Simo Sancus is the name of the god, but Simon is the name, is how they would pronounce Simon.
And what does this god look like? The Simo.
Well, that's the mystery, because we only have the statue base. That's all that survived of the statue. So the statue itself was gone. But what we think the Romans did with it is that they came to the statue and they swore oaths to each other in making contracts, and that this god verified the oath and brought vengeance on the oath breakers. And that the Simonians in Rome adapted this figure because they identified Simon as the high god, a Zeus-like figure. Wow. And since Simo Sancus was similar to Zeus as the god of oaths, they could make this identification. Incidentally, they also identified Helen with another goddess, Athena. And so there's a lot of things going on.
There's a statue of Sophia that, if I'm not mistaken, it is in Athens, and is identified with Athena. If I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you know about this.
Well, Athena already is the god of wisdom, goddess of wisdom. So that would, for the Greeks, that would be a no-brainer.
Yeah, so that's what that means. Okay, so I just want to tie that together just for the audience so they know what we're talking about. This is a real thing. This is golden stuff. Now, the last thing I want to ask you, because it just popped in my head, was the dating of Acts with Simon Magus. You said it's early. You think it's way later than people think? Isn't Luke the one who wrote this?
That's a much longer story, and I can only give a teaser because I want to do probably at some point with you or Derek on Myth Vision. We'll do a whole episode on the dating of Acts.
Let's do that. Yeah.
But the short narrative is that Acts depends on Josephus, and Josephus is 96. Very late in the 1st century. So 96. Yeah, so Acts has to be early 2nd century at the earliest. Acts also, in my opinion, uses the Great Declaration, and specifically the Great Declaration commentary, which may not have been written until about 130. Acts also shows signs of defeating Marcionite ideology, which didn't show up until the 130s and the 140s. So through this process of reverse engineering, we have to come up with a quite late date here.
I'm laughing because I'm the thumbnail. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna put your eyes are gonna have lasers coming out of them for this video. This is one of those, like, you just crushed it in this one. This was amazing. And yeah, that's all. That's the last of the questions I have. And if you want anything else you want to say, that's it for me. This was amazing.
Nope. Thanks, Neil. And thanks to all your viewers. And catch this and the longer chapter 3 of Found Christianities, and check out the primary text, the Great Declaration commentary, on my Patreon.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's another thing. The book is available on Amazon, and go to your Patreon as well. Patreon.com/MDavidLitwa. Very easy to find. Simple. Click on that. Pick a tier. You got tiers as low as $3. What is that? That's $36 a year. You got $36 laying around for the. You can pay. That's nothing. That's all I gotta say. You know, it's and you're getting what you're getting from that is just you're getting scholarship, good scholarship out to the public, and this is what we're trying to do. This is why I have this channel. This is why I love having you on, and you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.